Everyone knows today's guest, former Governor Chris Christie of New Jersey. He is one of the smartest politicians I've ever talked to. Very, very direct, kind of tells it like it is, calls balls and strikes. His most recent book, bestseller, What Would Reagan Do? The Life Lessons from the Last Great President, is out in paperback now. We're going to talk about the book a bunch, but let's first get into it. How are you, Governor?
Doing great, Donnie. How are you?
All right, so we're about 60 days in, I guess, to the Trump presidency. Give me pleasant surprises and unpleasant surprises from your point of view.
I think pleasant surprises is that they seem much more organized than they were in the first term. They came in with a plan. People are executing the plan. Now, on the unpleasant side, there's lots of things they're doing that I don't agree with that I don't think are good for the country.
Such as?
Well, I would start with what's going on between Russia and Ukraine. Mm-hmm. And I think that the president is beginning to find out that Vladimir Putin considers him weak. If he was going to pitch as much as he pitched for Putin in the Oval Office with Vladimir Zelensky, and then there wasn't an immediate yes to the ceasefire agreement from Putin, it tells me Putin thinks he can push Trump around. And if I were Putin, I'd probably think the same thing.
Is Putin? We're going to stay on this for a second. Everybody always kind of wonders why the fascination with Putin, why the connection to Russia, and is it as simple as he sees the world, the new world order, and it's China, Russia, us, and we divide up the world, and it's as simple as that, and as opposed to our old allies. Game it out for me.
I don't think he sees anything about a new world order, Donnie. I think he looks at people like Vladimir Putin, President Xi of China, Kim Jong-un in North Korea, and Erdogan in Turkey, and wishes he could be them.
Yeah, he sees them. He sees them as real leaders and strong leaders, strong men.
Right. He has an affinity for dictators because they tell people to do things and they do them. And in President Trump's world, that would be the perfect world. And so far in Washington, D.C., in these first 8 weeks or so, he seems to be living in close to a perfect world.
Yeah. What are some of your other unpleasant surprises?
Well, I thought that the Adams case, and how that was handled at DOJ is not only bad for the Adams case, and by the way, I don't have a clue as to whether Eric Adams is guilty or not. I really don't. But what I will tell you is that it's wrong, in my view, for a Justice Department to hold an indictment over somebody's head as a way to ensure their cooperation with policy goals that the government wants to pursue. Now, by the way, the policy goal of cleaning out criminal illegal immigrants from Washington, from New York City, is what I agree with. And I think what's gone on in New York City under Bill de Blasio and Eric Adams on that front has been absolutely deadly damaging to the people of the city of New York and to the city's image around the world. I agree with the policy pursuit, but you can't hold a criminal prosecution over someone's head if, in fact, the Justice Department believes that the Adams indictment was political by the Biden administration, that it's tainted by politics and unsupported by the facts. Then dismiss it with prejudice, which for those who are not lawyers on the podcast today means it's gone forever and cannot be brought back. They want to dismiss it without prejudice, which means they could bring it back anytime they want. And to me, that's essentially blackmailing Eric Adams to say, do what we want, or you'll be back in court facing criminal charges that could put you in jail for a long time. That not only is bad for Eric Adams, but worse, it's bad for our justice system, because that's not the way it should be operating. And I think for him to do that shows you that he believes the Justice Department are his personal lawyers, not the lawyers for the country.
Yeah, he's pretty out front about that. I mean, the one thing about Trump is tells it. That's why I started the question of surprises, because to me there aren't too many surprises. He tells you whether you like it or not. Tells you what he's going to do, and he does it.
Yeah, look, I got approached by a retired colleague at ABC News about 3 weeks ago and said, answer in one sentence what you think of the first 3 weeks. And my answer was exactly what I expected.
Yeah.
And even now, there have been some things that have surprised me a bit. The tone and tenor of his speech at the Justice Department last week, I thought was astonishing, given the history of that building and the history of that department. But for the most part, I've not been surprised by almost anything that's happened.
What I'm finding, at least in New York and on the Upper East Side of New York and in the place I travel, where it's a very different view of Trump this time around. It's much more accepting. And I figured out what he done and the things that we all yelled about democracy and all the freedoms with that and the losses of that, is that he gives each group red meat of what they want. Take the Jewish community, for instance. He's been fantastic on Israel. He's been fantastic on anti-Semitism. And I think that when you say, if you get into the debate about, let's say, Mahmoud Khalil, should he been deported? Now, legally, there's a lot of scholars that say no. But if you're a Jew, you go, get this guy out of the country. And that math exists. Same thing with the criminals sent back to El Salvador, where even though there was a judge that said bring him back, nope, it just went forward anyway. And I think people are okay, I'm sensing, when you go, well, what if that's not against the law? What if he's not listening to the justices? Well, if they're getting what they want, they're willing to compromise democratic norms. And that's the thing that I'm learning.
Well, look, I think you might be giving people too much credit for analysis. Generally, I think that most people are not like us, Donnie, in a lot of respects. But the one I'm discussing is that they're not focused on it.
No.
They're not focused on the minutia day to day of what's going on. What they see out of Washington right now is activity, action.
Yes, just do it. Yeah.
Strength. And they're not analyzing it. Now, the place where he's going to begin to have a problem is economically. And you can see it already in terms of some of his numbers regarding people's approval of his handling of the economy.
Yeah.
I think the tariff situation makes people very uneasy for two reasons. One, they don't think it seems like a smart thing to do. That's their sense of it, I think. And secondly, they don't like all of the back and forth on it. They're on, they're off, they're on, they're off. I think people don't like to see that. And when you add to it a continuing set of economic circumstances which haven't seemed to get better on prices in particular, and everybody in this country now who has any savings of it all has it in their 401k, and they look at it all the time. And when they see what's happened in the stock market, and people from Wall Street are saying this is because of the uncertainty regarding tariffs, that stuff is stuff that's going to be very hard for him to overcome if he doesn't get it fixed.
I have some friends on Wall Street who have a theory that, you know what, he doesn't mind if the economy tanks because he'll lower interest rates, he'll bring it back, he'll be a hero, he'll be able to point to this and say it was Biden, and he's got such a long runway there that he's willing to put up with this kind of short-term unpopularity, at least as far as economic guidance. I think he's 54 to 47 underwater on handling the economics, which he's never underwater. His approval rating is high for him at 47, but handling the economy, as you said, is at a low for him.
Yeah, no, I don't believe that either, that he's got this theory.
Right.
He doesn't like any bad news
at
any time of any kind. But the problem is he has kind of a longish runway, but it's not that long.
Yeah.
In the end, Donnie, opinions will start to get hardened by the end of the year. And in 2026, and you can go back and look at what happened with George H.W. Bush. By 1992, the year he's running for re-election, the economy was improving. It continued to improve through the late spring and early summer, but it was too late. People were already convinced that the economy hadn't improved and wasn't going to improve. And even though there's a lagging appreciation by the public of the numbers that they see, unemployment's down, or inflation is down, or interest rates are down, but they don't feel it and see it yet.
That's what happened.
So I would tell you, I think his runway is really till mid-January of 26. Because if people still don't feel better, you don't see consumer confidence up or the economic feeling in the country better, it's very hard in an election year, in an election context, to change their mind in the year of the election. He's got to show results this year. because next year it'll be hard to change their mind, I think. And I think history generally shows that.
Let's move to the Democrats for a second. You know, I've talked recently that I've been a lifelong Democrat. I'm kind of an independent now. The party does not stand for a lot of what I stand for. I don't know what the hell they stand for right now. And give me your prescription of what they need to do, because I can never remember on either side a party being this lost and this voiceless.
They need to listen first. They are not listening. They didn't listen during the election in 24, and I think it's one of the big reasons they lost. They were lecturing rather than listening.
Yeah.
And they're still doing it. And, you know, if you can't get the idea that an overwhelming majority of the American people don't want biological men to play women's sports, then you don't belong in politics. If you don't get the idea that, you know, the overwhelming majority of the American people believe that government is wasteful, and so that if Donald Trump tries to cut a lot of employees out of the federal government, the position to take is not that the employees shouldn't be cut. It is that it should be done in a different way or in different areas.
Do it more discriminately, right?
Right. Use a scalpel, not a chainsaw,
right?
As Mr. Musk used on the stage at CPAC.
Yeah.
You know, there is no sense of listening by the Democrats right now. And, you know, Chuck Schumer is becoming, if he wasn't already, a flawed symbol of the Democratic Party. Hakeem Jeffries, in my view, has not asserted himself in a way that could allow him to be seen as a leader. So that's the third problem is, you know, if you don't have someone leading the show who is listening and then articulating an alternate approach to the Trump view, and someone who's credible, that becomes a big problem for the party. And I will tell you that if I were the Democratic Party, I would move all of our initiatives out of Washington, D.C. And I would put the spotlight on some of the really good governors that they have across the country. You know, folks like Josh Shapiro in Pennsylvania, Andy Beshear in Kentucky are two that come to mind right away. And, you know, Roy Cooper, who just left the governorship in North Carolina. These are viewed by the American people as relatively reasonable folks, and they speak in reasonable ways. And the Democratic Party needs to become the party of the states, and they should be preparing that in 26, because right now, Donnie, there's a 26-24 Republican margin among the governors. That's the lowest it's been since 2009 for Republicans. So the Democrats actually have a chance in 26 to take back a majority of the states. That'll make it more difficult for Donald Trump, but also will give them a platform for which to stand that does not include Washington, D.C.
Look, Democrats have to move to the center. You know, whoever is closest to the center wins for the most part, usually. And this country lives just right of center. My concern for the party is that, at least right now, that you take the AOCs of the world. You're not winning with her as one of the standard bearers of the party. You're just not, because I've heard so many people talk about swing voters or AOC. And this is not a knock on her. This is a knock on super progressivism. You're not going to win with that formula. It's that simple. So how do you build a tent that's big enough to win without alienating that left wing of the party, but not making it an important part of your brand?
Well, look, they did it in 2020. I mean, the fact is, if super progressivism was a saleable philosophy in this country, then Bernie Sanders would have been the Democratic nominee for president in 2020. Mm-hmm. Not only wasn't he, but as you know, Joe Biden kicked his ass from one end of this country to the other. And by the way, we're not talking about FDR. We're talking about Joe Biden did it. So what you need to do is acknowledge the existence of AOC and those folks, but do not from a policy perspective or rhetorically kowtow to them, because they are a losing formula for America, in my view. But clearly they're a losing formula for Democratic politics as it relates to general elections. And so it seems to me that you can't not acknowledge their existence. And quite frankly, they're a portion of the Democratic Party.
Sure.
But I have always believed, Donnie, that the super progressive side of the Democratic Party is much more bark than bite electorally, even inside the Democratic primaries. And I think that, you've got to get real about the fact that you can't respond to it that way, because if you do, if you respond in a solicitous way to that group, you're sealing your death certificate for the November election.
I hear you. I'm with you. Let's talk about Israel a bit. That's another place the Democratic Party lost me. They could not, without a comma or a but, just give an unequivocal support to Israel. And that debate over there overseas, to me, is not even about Jewishness, not just Western civilization versus barbarianism. And that was so troubling to me. I still voted Democrat, but it bothered me in my stomach. And now, as I see what Trump's doing, and I've been so critical in so many ways of the area, and see his unequivocal support of Israel, I kind of go to the Democrats. You lost me there.
Yeah, no, look, I went over to Israel a month after the attacks on October 7th. And what I came back and said to any of the other folks who were running for president on our side of the aisle is, you have to go there. You have to feel, experience, see what Hamas did in Israel to understand that there is no choice here. And Democrats, and look, Kamala Harris tried to do this. I don't know what she believes, but she was worried about Michigan and thought somehow if she didn't give full-throated support to Israel, that Muslims in Michigan would vote for her, when in fact, as we know from the post-election studies, Muslims voted in Michigan for Donald Trump.
Yeah, amazing.
And so in my view, I think what those Muslims are saying, they're Muslim Americans, let's remember. They're both. They're Muslim Americans. And I think those Muslim Americans understood the difference between right and wrong. And what Hamas did on October 7th was wrong under any definition of the word. What they continue to do today, continuing to hold hostages, is wrong. And the Democratic Party, by getting into bed with Hamas, was another factor that helped. Donald Trump, but for the help of Democrats, in my view, would not have been renominated or reelected.
Mm-hmm.
But they can't help themselves.
No. What would you have done if you were governor of New York at the time that protests in Columbia were going on?
I would have sent in the state police and cleaned the place out.
Yeah. Not complicated.
Not at all. Not at all. I would have gone in New York, which is a little more complicated a place than New Jersey. In New York, I would have gone to Eric Adams first, and I would have said, you do it with the NYPD, or I'm coming in with the state police. What's your choice? If he said he wasn't going to do it, I would have sent in the state police. And if it happened in New Jersey, where I don't have anywhere near as big a city as New York City, I would have just got in with the New Jersey State Police and said, you have one warning. This is it. In 6 hours, everyone who is here acting in this manner will be arrested. If you're gone in 6 hours, we'll leave. If you're not, we're arresting all these people, and we're leaving state police here for the foreseeable future to ensure that any student on this campus, Jewish or not, will feel safe to leave their dorm or their apartment, go to class, and come back and enjoy the college experience. And I wouldn't have waited, more than a day or two. And I certainly wouldn't have listened to any university president about what they wanted me to do.
Why is it that somehow hate towards Jews falls in a little bit of a but column? Whereas if you were marching on campuses saying kill the gays or kill the blacks or kill the Latinos, it would be shut down. But somehow kill the Jews, I don't know, doesn't seem to get the same rise out of so many people, where it's the most disgusting, vile thing in the world.
It's stunning to me, Donnie, because I grew up in a town named Livingston, New Jersey.
Very Jewish,
in Livingston, there's a plurality of Jewish folks when I was growing up. I don't know if that's still the way. So I grew up, I probably went to 14 or 15 bar and bat mitzvahs when I was 13 years old, and grew up and still remain with friends with so many of those folks that are Jewish, that we went from grade school through high school. So on a personal level, it's impossible for me to understand. Now, on a political level, I think what happens with these folks who tolerate it, or worse yet, encourage it, is that they believe that there is an either or to this argument because it centers around Israel to them, and Israel versus the Palestinians. I don't know how that empowers someone to treat a Jew in New York or Chicago or Los Angeles in a hateful way, in a violent way, but they believe it does. And I think you don't have the same political potential dichotomy today when it applies to African Americans. But I do think you've seen it a little bit, Donnie, with Hispanic Americans over time because of the immigration issue.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there has been some of it, not
to
the extent that it has been with Jewish Americans. But I think that's where it's at. And the last piece of it is the political correctness in university campuses, where these university presidents, many of them felt like, well, since there are two sides to the argument, if I weigh in to protect Jewish students, they may misinterpret that as I'm weighing in on behalf of Israel, and I can't have that. Yeah. And that's the most egg-headed approach to this issue. You take these students into your care for 4 years. You take their parents' money for the education you're supposed to be providing them. And they deserve, no matter what their religion, ethnicity, race is, they deserve to be in a place where they feel safe, regardless of the politics.
Just shifting back to Trump and what's going on in Washington, we always hear the term pending constitutional crisis. And that would come to a crescendo. Right now, whatever judges have ruled against Trump, he's appealing on various different issues. If something gets to the Supreme Court and Trump just goes, too bad, bring your army. Do you think we get to that point?
I don't, because I think one of the few institutions that Donald Trump has respect for are the courts. Now, he'll use rhetoric that makes it sound like he doesn't. But I do believe that because his whole life has been spent in court, he's used the legal system as a weapon.
That's a great point.
Frequently throughout his business career to intimidate, cajole, and win in a number of different ways. I think Trump understands the legal system giveth and it taketh away. He doesn't trust prosecutors anymore. But I think he believes that overall, because this is what his life experience has been, that on balance, he'll do better with the court system than he'll do without it. And I think that another way Democrats empower Trump is to call everything a constitutional crisis.
Yeah, yeah.
And then once Trump doesn't see a reaction to that, he'll keep pushing the edge of the envelope. And he'll wind up being empowered to do more things than if they had not called everything a constitutional crisis. The way I analogize this in the fall campaign, I was teaching a class at Yale on political campaigns. And I used to say to my students that Democrats talking about Trump is like eating comfort food. It makes them feel good. It makes them feel warm about themselves, even though it was completely ineffective politically, because all the people who fear Donald Trump in that way, despise Donald Trump in that way, they're already voting for the Democrats.
Yeah. Yeah, you're just preaching to the choir. That's what I feel like I'm on MSNBC all the time. And I haven't been on recently, but it's like you're just talking to the converted. It's just we are so in an echo chamber. It's the same thing with Fox. It's just has nothing to do with MSNBC. It's really tough to get your voice to the other side of the aisle.
And you know what? The only way for it to happen, Donnie, is for us to do it.
Yeah.
And keep doing it. And despite how discouraging it is, and it's been discouraging for me at times as well, but I just simply am not going to give in to the idea that we can't continue to persuade people if we keep at it. And that if you say things that are commonsensical things, that a large chunk of the country will buy that. And, I think that's one of the real risks that President Trump is causing right now, is he could very well overplay his hand. This is a guy who I think, oftentimes misreads the mandate and overextends it. And if he does that, he's going to find that a lot of those people who voted for him were people who didn't really want to vote for him or Harris, but just decided that Harris was just so like Biden that they figured, all right, the guy the last time ran the economy pretty well. There's things about him I don't like, but you know what? I can't vote for her. When she sits on The View and says, I wouldn't change anything from what Biden's doing, and 72% of the country says the country's on the wrong track, that's a guaranteed recipe to lose.
You know what's amazing? Even the people who are very, very anti-Trump, you don't hear anybody saying, "Oh, I wish Kamala was the president." There's not even this weird buyer's remorse. It's they're unhappy, but they kind of just knew that there was just almost no alternative on the other side.
No, and that's what people forget all the time, Donnie. Elections are choices.
Yes,
they are not referenda. There are choices, and the choice. And this is why I think if anybody wants to know why Donald Trump is the 47th president of the United States, there are only two words they ever need to say: Joe Biden.
Yeah.
And it's Joe Biden's selfishness.
Yes.
His self-centeredness, all the things that Biden accuses Trump of,
100%.
he is.
Well, also the same, with the knock on, it's not really a democracy. The way they just anointed Kamala, that Barack Obama and Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer made this decision. Whereas instead of having a playoff, I think they could have, as a marketing guy, if they took 5 or 6 weeks and turned it into just this kind of Hunger Games competition, it would have created excitement, and you would have come out with the candidate that had a chance of winning.
And this is part of the identity politics that the Democrats play, which is why they couldn't do it. You know why they didn't do it, Donnie? Because she's an African-American woman.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they could not pass over the African-American woman to even have a competition because they were afraid of how a portion of their base would react. And they even themselves just didn't feel comfortable with it, even though they knew that she had been an awful presidential candidate in 2020 and that nothing that had happened between 2021 and 2024
would change that
sense of her, right? And so, but in the end, all of this kind of consternation on the Democratic side is because Joe Biden refused to go when he said he would. He told us in 2020, I will be a transitional president. And he lied. And in 2022, he misread the midterms. Since they weren't a disaster for Democrats, he thought, they still love me. I can run. And nobody inside his administration, no one inside his family, took him aside and said to him, it's time to go. If he had gone through the midterms, Donnie, and said, you know what? The American people agree with a lot of what we're doing. And the way I'm going to prove that is I'm going to step aside.
Yeah.
I'm not going to run for re-election. I'm going to let there be an open competition among my party to be my successor. And whoever my party nominates, I will support. If he had done that, then I think this would have been a much, much different race in 2024 than it was. Instead, you have Donald Trump against a party that looked failed
and misleading
and dishonest.
Yeah. The very thing they were criticizing the Republicans for. Yeah. I remember watching it. I remember the Super Bowl last year when he didn't do, not this past year, but the year before, when he was still president, and he didn't do an interview. Now, that's the ultimate kind of softball interview. It was on, I think it was on NBC. It was on a friendlier network. It wasn't on Fox. And the fact that his people didn't think they could put him out there for 15 minutes, how anybody after that could say, no problem, no problem. I knew that's when Houston, we have a problem.
Yeah, look, you could see it. And I was saying it on TV through then. And a lot of the Democrats who were on TV with me on ABC, how dare you talk about this? I went to an event in Colorado in early 2024 where, one of the members of the audience who was a staunch Democratic supporter, I was on a panel with Ron Klain and got up and said to Ron Klain, what's plan B? What's plan B for Joe Biden? Like, it doesn't look like he's well. If something happens worse, what's plan B? And Ron Klain's response was, the president is in great physical, mental, and spiritual health. And repeated that mantra, Donnie, 3 different times till finally the donor said, I'm with you guys. Why are you lying to me?
Yeah.
I know what I see. And the Biden people just refuse to do it. And Joe Biden has this unique distinction in American history. He will be the only person who defeated Donald Trump, and he will be the person who reelected Donald Trump.
Yes. Amen. Amen. What a disappointment. Let's talk about the book a little bit. Out in paperback, bestseller. What Would Reagan Do? Life Lessons from the Last Great President. So if Reagan showed up today and he was looking around, what do you think would be coming out of his mouth?
Well, Reagan was, an incredibly, in public, an incredibly courteous guy. So he would have figured out an aw shucks kind of way to say, what the hell is going on here?
Yeah.
Who are these people running our government? Ronald Reagan was the guy who said, when someone agrees with you 80% of the time, they're your 80% friend, not your 20% enemy.
Yeah.
Ronald Reagan was the guy who understood that coming home with half a loaf of bread was better than coming home with none. Ronald Reagan, though, also understood that on matters of real principle, that you stand your ground, no matter what happens, but that not everything can be a matter of principle. Reagan would look at this right now and say, here's a principle. The Russians are the enemy of freedom and liberty everywhere in the world. And they will always have to be stood up to by the United States and our allies. That this is, he's the one who called them the evil empire when they were the Soviet Union. He's the one who understood that only strength and power would dismantle the Soviet Union. And we now have somebody there, he'd say Vladimir Putin is trying to put together the old band.
Yeah.
And he would understand that and he would stand firmly against it. On the other hand, he would look at what's going on with the national debt and the economy in this country and our future and say, if we don't fix Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, and remember, he did it. He didn't just talk it. He's the last guy who passed Social Security reform and got it done the right way. So Reagan would look at this mayhem that's going on in Washington and say, you're not fixing the problems that need to be fixed, and you're making the problems that exist even worse than they were before. That's not what a president is for. And Reagan would be completely dumbfounded, lastly, by the anti-immigration rhetoric.
Yeah.
Remember
his final speech that he gave when he left office. Yeah.
Yep. I mean, the shiny city on a hill had a door
that
was open for people to come and make their lives that way. Now, Reagan also did immigration reform. You can argue about how successful it was, but he took a chance to grow and expand our country and our economy. And he would not understand why people would be treating immigration the way it's been treated over time rhetorically. I don't think he would object to people being deported who were criminal illegal immigrants, but he would also be looking for a way to make sure that we continue to bring in more and more people into this country to grow it, make our economy grow, make it more a diverse place. And he wouldn't understand that piece of what's going on either.
Well, the first thing you gave him kudos for is reaching across the aisle, Tip O'Neill, and is that even and what's interesting, in polls, voters say they want that. They really, really want that. Yet, our media echo chamber system is not set up for that. Can we get back to that?
With a president who wants to do it, yes.
Yeah.
Look, you were talking before about how, as objectionable as you find Trump, you see so many people in your orbit who are not objecting as loudly because he's doing certain things.
Yeah, I actually find I'm pleasantly, I don't know if I'm getting hardened in my old age, but I like what he's doing on immigration. I like what he's doing with DEI. I like what he's doing for Israel. I'm not happy with the tariffs. But I'm trying to approach things where I start with, when I get into debates with people about Trump, I start with, well, I'm going to give him this. And I think both sides have got to start doing that. That's the way we get to the
right. And I think that to get to the point on Reagan, it is that when you have a president who is willing to lead in difficult directions, it seems most of the time the American people are willing to follow. So it doesn't look like we can reach across the aisle right now. But the reason we can is because Donald Trump's not trying to.
Mm-hmm.
Because Joe Biden, despite all of his bullshit during the campaign in 2020, never tried to.
Yeah.
He got into office and he ran hard left and continued to demonize the Republicans. Barack Obama, for all of his talk about it, didn't try to do it. The last one who took steps to try to do it was George W. Bush early in his administration, with Ted Kennedy on No Child Left Behind and on a couple of other issues that were important to Democrats early in his administration. 9/11 happened and it changed the entire focus of his presidency. But I do believe if you got a president who came in there and said, I'm going to do it because it is the right thing to do and it is the best thing to do to ensure the future stability and strength of our country, I think that a president could do it. Because you know what would happen? As that president started to get a greater following, the media would follow too.
Yeah, that's fair.
Because they're a business.
That's it. In the book, you kind of divide it based on lessons, things that he did and lessons learned. Talk to me about a couple of those lessons.
Well, let's start off with Ronald Reagan as a young man, learned the lesson of helping others. And that we all needed to be in a position personally and as a government to help those who are in the most difficulty. So in his life, he had a dad who was an alcoholic, couldn't hold a job, faced real poverty as a young man. And Reagan understood that, people needed help, and he saw people help him and his family. And he tried to return that through what he was doing in his own life, even as a young man. Ronald Reagan, what did he work as a young man? A lifeguard. Yeah. Saving others, helping others. And so I think that's one of the big lessons Reagan learned as a young man. He learned during the time that he was president of the Screen Actors Guild that you had to be willing to approach every problem with your eyes wide open. And Reagan, who came in as an FDR Democrat.
That's what people don't forget. They forget that. A big FDR Democrat.
Big FDR Democrat. Reagan saw the way the Democratic Party was moving back then towards a more socialistic, communistic approach to things. And Reagan stood out against it, stood up and while at the same time he was fighting McCarthyism, which he did, which was the extreme of the right at that time, he also fought the communists in his own union, saying you're diminishing our country, you're making our country less free and less full of opportunity. And the third thing was he learned about how listening to people could make you smarter. So when Ronald Reagan leaves the Screen Actors Guild and his movie career ends, he goes and works for General Electric.
That's right.
And does TV for them, but more importantly, travels all across the country to GE factories and plants all over to speak on behalf of the company. But what he wrote was that he learned much more then about what the American people really cared about, what they were really concerned about, what they really aspired to by traveling all over this country to those plants and factories and listening, doing town hall meetings at all those places and listening to folks. Reagan transformed that into his politics. He became a much better listener and as a result could be a better leader. And, he used to say that to O'Neill all the time. And we need to listen to each other. We need to understand each other's problems. We need to help each other. All those lessons were the lessons that built the modern, not the early Reagan politician. He changed even from when he got elected governor in 1966 to when he got elected president in 1980. And he changed once again, Donnie, after he was shot. And the lesson he learned there was that God has a purpose for us. And Reagan always was somewhat of a religious guy, but after getting shot, he understood that God was counting on him to do certain things that were absolute goods. And that's where you saw the effort to open to the Soviet Union, to have arms reductions as opposed to limitations, and to invite Gorbachev here and to try to do something different, even, taking the shot in Reykjavik of eliminating all nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
This is a guy who saw that as part of his moral obligation. He learned that, later in life. And so, I loved writing the book because he was the first person I ever voted for. I turned 18 in September of 1980. And so my first vote ever was that 1980 presidential election. And I will tell you that back then I voted for Ronald Reagan because I felt like he gave us hope and Jimmy Carter gave us no hope.
Yeah.
And that's why I voted for Reagan. But I hadn't really reevaluated my feelings about Reagan for a long time. And going back and doing the book allowed me to reevaluate all the reasons why Reagan was a great leader, not just what I kind of recall from back in those years when I was in my late teens and early 20s, watching him as president. I went back and really examined his life, and it made writing the book a whole lot of fun.
So what's next for Chris Christie?
Who knows, Donnie? Part of what the promise I made to my wife when we decided to run in 2024 was, she said to me, look, if you win, we know what we'll be doing. But if you don't win, I want you to promise me that you're not going to rush into whatever is next for you. I want you to really take a breath. You've been going nonstop now for the last 20 years, from the time you became U.S. Attorney in 2002 till when this race would be over in 2024. And she said, I really want you to take a breath and think about, in what will probably be the last professional act of your career, what you want it to be. So I have a consulting firm where we do a lot of consulting on crisis communication and crisis management. I have a law firm where we represent some folks, not a lot. I don't want to do a lot of practicing law, but special cases and opportunities. I'm on 4 corporate boards in 4 very different businesses, where I'm getting to learn a lot about business, being on the ground and learning about it. And then I continue to do the commentary on ABC, because I want to remain a public voice on things like we talked about today. So I understand from the New York Times, Donnie, that's called a portfolio career. Sounds very fancy. I like that.
I'm gonna pick that. I got a portfolio career. I'm gonna use that. Yeah.
My soon-to-be 92-year-old father tells his friends, Chris is cobbling together a bunch of things to make a living. Less sexy than the portfolio career.
I like portfolio career.
Yeah, but that's what I'm doing. And I remain committed to being involved in public conversation. And whether that'll lead to running for anything again, I don't know. But certainly, given how old all our politicians are becoming, hell, I'm only 62. I'm a kid.
You're a kid.
So
You're a kid. Yeah. Well, I hope you do. You're one of the great voices of reason. I've become a big fan over the years. We didn't start out that way. We had some dukes and duking it out on TV, but I think you're fantastic, and we could use a Chris Christie back in public service.
Well, I appreciate that. And look, one of the things that I've always liked, even when we were debating each other on TV, was that afterwards, we could always smile, laugh about it, shake hands, and respect the fact that we believed what we believed. And the biggest thing that bothers me about today's public conversation is that it's not enough to disagree with the person across from you. You must demean them as well.
Yeah. And
to me, and you know what I was like as governor, like I was as tough as anybody.
Yeah.
But you didn't have to make, like I had a Democratic legislature, you didn't have to make those folks small.
Yeah.
Because you know what? A week from now, you had to work with them on something else.
Yeah.
You want to beat them. But if not, you got to be able to get back to it. So I always enjoyed that part of our relationship. And that's why whenever you call and think it's useful to have me on this podcast, I'm happy to come.
I love it. The book out in paperback, bestseller, What Would Reagan Do? Life Lessons from the Last Great President. Chris Christie, thank you as always.
Donnie, thanks for having me.
Everybody, thanks for watching. If you like it, hit that subscribe button. And we love having you here watching On Brand. And just don't miss any future episodes. So don't forget to hit that subscribe button. We'll see you next time.